Hi there, I'm Tom Field. I'm Senior Vice President of Editorial with Information Security Media Group, and I want to welcome you to our latest panel discussion of cybersecurity leadership, where we bring CEOs and CISOs together to talk about the leading issues of the day. Today, the topic is cybersecurity risk in OT and IIoT, the Industrial Internet of Things. We have got a stellar panel of experts here today. Let me introduce them right now. We've got Blake Moret, the CEO of Rockwell Automation. Blake, thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Yaniv Vardi is to his left. He's the CEO of Claroty. Yaniv, we're thrilled to have you here as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning.
And then we also have rounding out our panel, Summer Fowler, the CISO with Argo AI. John Kindervag, Senior Vice President, Cybersecurity Strategy with Onto-It, the godfather of Zero Trust. And we've got Chuck Brooks, the president of Brooks Consulting International. Folks, thank you all so much for taking time to speak with us today and participate in this panel. To get us started, the Industrial Internet of Things is a significant component of future manufacturing and process control systems. Cybersecurity is the top concern for IIoT adoption. And since applications for the IIoT are natural evolution, IIoT inherits some security challenges from IoT simply because of the similar basic architecture. Meanwhile, differences still exist between IoT and IIoT, and hence the latter has some specific security concerns, mainly on protecting critical industry control systems. Thus, we categorize the security challenges in IoT systems into two groups: the security challenges that exist in both IoT and IIoT, and the security challenges specific to industry systems. Today, we want to explore the difference between the two, and we have assembled this array of talented cybersecurity professionals and leaders with which to conduct that exploration. We're going to start with a conversation about critical infrastructure. Industrial control systems play an important role in the monitoring, control, and automation of critical infrastructure such as water, gas, oil, electricity. And recently we have seen cyber attacks on water, energy, and food pipelines. Prior to this, Stuxnet and the Ukrainian power grid. So this naturally begs the question, how should we manage cybersecurity risks in such infrastructure on which the day-to-day functioning of societies relies? Blake and Yaniv, I wonder if you might tackle that first, and then I'd love to hear from our CISO group as well.
In the world that we live in at Rockwell, the industrial Internet of Things includes a lot of processes where machinery is moving. And so there are natural safety concerns, there's reliability concerns, because you can't bring these processes down in the middle of activity, and you have to make sure that the movement is being controlled at all times. And so the stakes in many cases are higher. And the types of technology and the applications are just different between the carpeted part of the enterprise and the parts of the enterprise where things are being made. So there is commonality. Things have to be handled in a coordinated way. But on the other hand, there's some very real differences in the approach and the availability of the equipment and in the technologies.
Yeah, I completely agree. The way we look at that is companies in the industrial economy are going through the digital transformation, right? In simple words, basically automating and optimizing their traditional manufacturing processes and trying to connect whatever they can to be more competitive, to increase productivity. That creates a huge risk. And the way to really mitigate that risk and address that is first by creating a proactive risk management approach and a culture in the company. And in reality, start with visibility. Really identify what assets you have in the network between OT, IoT, IIoT, IT, whatever you have, because all of that starting to be connected between OT and IT to the network, to the cloud. And so visibility is the first point that we always suggest, and we see CISOs are struggling with visibility in the OT side, but that's the first point to address. And then from there, start to build your vulnerability management and risk management, start to understand the risk you inherited, and start to address that with continuous threat detection, securing the remote access and controlling the remote access, and so on. But the digital transformation is really pushing hard on getting visibility first to what you have, because you can protect what you don't see.
In the zero trust world, which is the world that I use to protect these kinds of environments, we talk about creating protect surfaces. Protect surfaces contain DAS elements, data, applications, assets, or services. IoT, IIoT, OT, they're sometimes all of those things, right? What's unique about them is sometimes I think we go too much in this alphabet soup thing. IT, IoT, OT, IMOT. And what they all have in common is TCP IP. At some point, they're going to cross a TCP IP network. You know, back in the old days, we used asynchronous serial on SCADA, and it was pretty safe because you had to, you know, it was really complex to make a change. Now we're running across functionally Ethernet and maybe some various wireless technologies and stuff, but it gives purchase to the attackers. And I think sometimes we do a bit of disservice by trying to fragment this up into all these different things, because within the TCP IP stack, there's only certain things that we can do to control it. And then we have very old models about how we're doing cybersecurity controls, right? Because risk, I think, is very hard. I mean, the risk is always there. There's never a time when you don't want your system to work. There's never a time you don't want it to be secure. And you never know what the attacker is going to do, right? So we can't control the attacker. So we have to control our systems. But what we have to do is move beyond some of the old 20th century models in this area, you know, whether it's air gap networks. I was on a group with a bunch of CISOs yesterday where they were talking about air gap networks, and one person finally said, hey, air gap networks are probably less secure because they're never tested, right? They're never under load, and we just assume that they're there. So we can't really air gap them. And then we have old models in OT, which are being translated over into IoT and IIoT, like the Purdue model, which goes back to the 80s, right? So it's ancient in terms of cybersecurity. So we have to move towards new things. There's things like ISO or IEC, ISA 62443 that are more modern ways of thinking about it. But really, we need to just approach these assets like any other asset and think about how we're going to control them within the TCP IP stack and control who has access to them over what application, and then what we're going to do to inspect, log, maintain that access so that these systems can be up, running, operational, and secure at all times.
You know, even discussing the concept of an air gap right now becomes a huge challenge because, let's be realistic, those air gaps, because of the nature of how we're transitioning as organizations, become less and less feasible, right? So even thinking about that air gap becomes not feasible. So while there are models out there that we've looked at traditionally, I do encourage that potentially, instead, like, we go back to the fundamentals of what we're looking at when it comes to cybersecurity, and that maybe the order of importance is different between a traditional IT system and an OT system. When I think about an IT system, confidentiality often hits the top of that stack. When I think about an OT system, availability and integrity sometimes take more importance over that confidentiality. And so coming at this from the approach, and you mentioned the Purdue model and the adjustments that have been made on that to address OT and IIoT, coming at it from the approach of potentially even an adversary. What is it that an adversary would want to be able to accomplish on an OT system? And then prioritizing those controls against that, rather than using just a basic framework that was used for IT, you can then start to consider, what is it that an adversary or a mistaken process or an error would cause the OT system to be brought to a place where it's not functioning well? safety is going to hit the top of that list. So we got to think about what it is that would make things less safe. Then I do think it's availability, and every organization is probably going to have a different order of that operation. And that's where I think that as we start to think about this OT and how we kind of blend that with IT, we have to recognize that it might actually be the same risk models that we're using. It's just the prioritization of the things inside of those risk models are going to differ.
I think we're at a timely discussion today, since there's a new presidential order that just came out doing such on the critical infrastructure that basically accelerates some of the risk management aspects and puts more of onus on industry to cooperate. And I think that's the missing element that's been part of the whole protecting of critical infrastructure, is a collaboration between the public sector and the private sector. It's been slow in coming, and now it seems to be much more of a mandate. And I think it's going to get more and more aggressive. And I think it's really important when looking at the last year of these hacks and the response, the incident management responses, particularly to ransomware, have been all over the map. And it's in a broad sense, it's very difficult to just universally say that IT and OT systems mixing, but IT systems can be taken offline pretty easily, but you can't take an OT system offline unless you want to cut down your production and operation, which may be water plants, it may be energy plants, it may be electricity. So there's really some policy challenges we have to look at too. And I'm very encouraged by the attitudes of the CISOs here, looking at having first things first is know what you have, and second thing is assess what you have. And I think that too many of the companies out there have not done that, and they have not even got to the point of looking at how they upgrade their legacy systems and what they have, all the various programs and applications they even have to orchestrate. So I think you really have to start at the beginning. And I think for most critical infrastructure that is mostly dated, I think that the implementation by private industry and government collectively and in coordination is going to make a big difference.
We have to look beyond what we think might happen and realize that environmental concerns and especially hackers can do things that we can never imagine. Stuxnet was gorgeous from an attack perspective, and it happened on an air gap network. Snowden, Manning, they destroyed air gap networks, right? So we have to think about risk management beyond the probabilistic statements that we try to do, and within the limitations of our own field of view, and look at it from an attacker perspective or an act of God perspective.
I want to transition now and talk about management complexities. Now, we've acknowledged that ICS and SCADA are different than pure IoT, and they're very different actors compared to the usual IT staff who manage operational IT systems, as IIoT systems are often directly in the path of factory floor employees. Yaniv and Blake, I'd love for you to take this first and again toss it back to our CISOs for perspective. What are the complexities of managing security in a landscape shaped by the often competing demands of a variety of direct stakeholders, managers, control engineers, enterprise IT personnel, field site operators? You've got lots of demands there. How do you manage the complexities?
What I said before about digital transformation, getting these industrial companies to connect the OT in conversion to IT, created a lot of conflicts between, IT and OT, where, back to Blake's point before, and to Jim's point, IT is really focusing on confidentiality, on data, and a change for them is blessed. They really embrace change. They need to patch a system and, patch a vulnerability, address a bug fix. A change is positive. A change in the OT side of things might create a risk and might be negative. You cannot take a system down when you have to patch a legacy system, 20 years old system that cannot be patched anymore or will be patched slowly. It's a challenge, and you cannot take down the system. Their focus is different. Their priorities are different, availability, reliability. And so there are conflicts between OT and IT. More than that, we learned that when we spoke to so many CISOs that the security guys many times don't know much about the OT side of things, the industrial networks. And so having issues and challenges with visibility, understanding what assets they have, how the assets are connected. The operation guys, plant managers, process engineers, and so on, many times don't know much about security. And so there's a gap. But this gap has to be addressed because these companies are trying to be competitive, trying to increase productivity, hence connecting the OT to the IT to improve productivity, to improve the efficiency they have. And so the way we see that companies are addressing it today is by addressing it with an executive sponsor, a CISO, a CIO, even the CEO that is kind of pushing a strategy forward and pushing the industrial cybersecurity journey forward to make sure that these guys, the OT and the IT, will be aligned behind the strategy.
I would just add to that, I think the skills gap is particularly manifested here. Workforce understanding of when you're trying to implement a defense in-depth approach on the factory floor, how big that attack surface is, from the end devices to the networks to the software, which might include a significant amount of open source code, to the insider risk, and being able to educate a workforce that, by the way, is probably changing pretty dynamically, in the job market for manufacturing that exists today. And so that's a real challenge for manufacturers.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the other problems with OT security is really the lack of talent, just like it is with cybersecurity IT. There's a high turnover rate there. I spoke last year at the G20 Energy Conference, and this is one of the biggest challenges they have is recruiting and holding people in OT security. So that requires a new attitude or new strategy to be able to keep up with the digital transformation. So it leads to another topic, which is really automation. What can they do to automate those roles, or at least negate the necessity of having people that they can't find or can't keep. So I think it's another huge risk element that OT has to look at.
I want to switch to a different topic here and talk about getting the attention of the executive suite. This is a conversation I want to start with our CISOs, and I want to get Blake and Yaniv to chime in as well. So since 2017, global cyber attacks on manufacturing have had significant impacts that we've seen. And unfortunately, these types of attacks, particularly ransomware, have become commodity attacks. They're carried out by criminal underground groups with a purely financial motive. This is why cybersecurity and manufacturing has become such an important topic. And certainly it's getting a lot more attention at the CEO and the board levels of companies than ever did in the past. So my question, Summer, perhaps you could take this first and pass it to your colleagues. Do you see that same attitude in CEOs from other companies? And if not, do you have suggestions on how CISOs in particular can encourage similar response and behavior?
I think that CEOs are absolutely more aware these days, especially, no matter what your company is doing, are aware of exactly, the concept that, hey, the cybersecurity could be something that is a negative impact to this company, whether it's a manufacturing company, a banking company, whatever the organization is. I do think that there is a lack of skill set, as we've discussed here. So who is actually responsible for OT cybersecurity? Who is responsible for both sides of the house? I think there's probably a skills gap and maybe even a misalignment in terms of where does the governance start? Who's responsible for it? Should it be that the CISO is in charge of both sides of a house with an IT and an OT side, IIoT? Is this something that goes to a different chain where potentially a CIO or a different group is responsible? I don't think so, but I don't actually know that we have settled on a governance structure yet. So while I think there is a general awareness, I don't know that we've even tackled it at the top governance level.
The pandemic got businesses to operate differently today, or accelerated the remote operation. 40% of the businesses in the US confirmed that they will start to operate remotely in a hybrid approach. And that means that they will have in the manufacturing and in the industrial space will have to get their users access the networks remotely because they still need to control and manage the production lines. And that will mean that they will have to get their third-party vendors access the networks remotely. And that happened already since last March. And attackers exploit that. And you see the frequency and the impact of attacks growing significantly. And you see a lot of it is coming because of the remote access that is being granted, but at the same time not being secured, not being controlled. And so we are living in a different era. We're living in a time that we're actually changing the way we do business today, but not all of the companies are addressing the new way they're actually operating their business. And so CEOs need to be aware and need to address that.
I think CEOs still think too much of security and cybersecurity as a cost item rather than an investment, and that it still needs to be a priority in educating them. It obviously affects reputation and operations, and I think part of this change, as everyone said, is from COVID and remote work, but it's also some other factors here. I think there's a lot more cooperation between these criminal groups now executing these ransomware attacks and state sponsors. And it's very sophisticated. They have resources. And now they also have the ability to get cryptocurrencies and get paid. And as you see from the recent episodes with Colonial Pipeline and others, that they are getting paid. So as long as they're going to continue to get paid, they're going to do it more and more. And so that means there needs to be a mindset change among critical infrastructure companies and operators that they're going to get targeted no matter what. And if they don't have a security posture, the risk management strategy in place, they're going to be victims.
Well, one of the things that I tried to bring to cybersecurity was a concept of grand strategy and strategy, which had been missing. So that's what Zero Trust is about. Zero Trust is really a strategy to define a grand strategy for an organization. And that's why it resonates so high up with CEOs and even the President of the United States with the recent executive order regarding Zero Trust. So you need to start thinking strategically, because not only is cybersecurity not a business inhibitor or a cost factor anymore, it is an enabler. It makes things work. But having a data breach or having a significant cybersecurity event is the only thing that IT can do to get the CEO fired. So Target was really the most important event, in my estimation, in cybersecurity, because for the first time ever, a CEO got fired because of a failure in cybersecurity. And so we need to start thinking more strategically. This is here to stay, and we can't dismiss it as, wow, that's costing us money. We spend way too little on cybersecurity, given the importance and given the fact, like if you take manufacturing for example, we're all worried about, we talk about the secret formula of something. Well, yeah, there's a secret formula, but you can probably figure that out. But the process around making that product, that is the critical intellectual property. So you can have the formula, but if you can't figure out how that manufacturing process works, you can't replicate it. And because nation states are trying to steal our intellectual property to advance, and they will publicly say this, to advance their own end goals. I mean, why would you do research and development when you can just steal this stuff? That's logical, And so you can advance your programs in your company by stealing it from somebody else. And so we have to protect not just the OT assets, but the intellectual property that surrounds that, because that's just as important, if not more important.
I mean, it is a pervasive and consistent topic, not only in the boardroom, but in our case, since we're a provider of technology, it's in the tech committee. So it's in the audit committee, it's in the tech committee, it's in the general board discussions. And I think what boards are looking at, first of all, they're needing to have some amount of domain expertise themselves, not to be the subject matter experts for a corporation, but to understand the basic concepts. But then what they're looking for is a consistent, broad, unified approach. And so to the early, question, should it be organized where the IT and the OT security is managed ultimately under one organization? I very much think yes, given that air gaps are not going to protect us. And given that a lot of the data, makes its way into the IT part of the organization, there has to be a coordinated approach to it, but then recognizing the differences and making sure that all of the different large areas of threat are being addressed. And again, it's that defense in depth approach. It's making sure that your traditional failure mode effect analysis does contemplate things that may in the past have had a very low level of probability and therefore, weren't addressed or weren't funded. And the events of the last year and a half have showed us very much that those things can rise to the top. And so you have to contemplate, those once in a lifetime events.
I always recommend that the CISO have a direct reporting structure to the CEO. One of the things that I have found in my career, and I'm very old, so I've been around a long time, is that CEOs will not be told exactly what's going on, and other people will try to hide the truth from them. So when there's a big data breach like Target, for example, that catches them off guard. I thought you said everything was secure. Well, there was somebody down below who knew it wasn't, and they were trying to get that message up, but they were blocked because no one wants to give bad news to the CEO. And so CEOs have to want to hear the bad stuff, not just the good stuff.
Friends, I want to turn to talking about improving IoT security. There have been many proposals to use certificate-less signature schemes, machine learning approaches, public key encryption, as well as blockchain. One of the hardest things to do in security is to balance security and productivity. So my question, and John, perhaps you'll take this first and pass the baton to your colleagues. Given that every company is different, there's not one size that fits all, how do you prioritize? This is something you've specialized in your work.
Having visibility, understanding what you're protecting, the protect surface is key. And every zero trust environment that I do is tailor-made for each protect surface. And so you can't say we should use this technology or that technology, which we want to do in our industry. And especially if you're a vendor, you want to do that. But you have to look at the stuff you're protecting, and each thing needs a different way of being protected. And so we get all these buzzwords. You've thrown out a number of them. Blockchain, which one friend of mine describes as the world's slowest and hardest to use database, which I think is a fun way to look at that. All these other technologies. Well, those technologies may be great technologies, but are they great technologies for the thing you're protecting? And so I see a lot of people trying to create some sense of ubiquity because they don't want to put the energy into thinking about each thing that they're protecting. And that just is not going to work in this world. So you're going to have to mix and match and then figure out how to manage and operationalize that, because we have great technologies and we have it's difficult to operationalize things. And so you go back to some of the big data breaches. They knew there was something going on, but they couldn't operationalize the response in time to achieve the speed that they needed against the attackers. Because remember, hackers don't have change control. They don't have a lot of things inhibiting their ability to attack. And we have a lot of things inhibiting our ability to protect and respond to those attacks.
I agree. I mean, technologies are really enablers and tools, and every case is going to be a different scenario depending on what you're trying to protect. But one thing I think that's sort of universal, both with IT and OT, is the access management and control aspect of it, which is also really policy driven. And a lot of companies neglect the fact that they have administrators leave and don't turn over resources, or they're still on the system. I think some basic things like that could be done for every business to make sure to help mitigate vulnerabilities and easy access points. And also encryption. I mean, there are different types of encryption, and it's depending upon your needs. Whether it be a certificate list or polymorphic, whatever. I think it's something you need to evaluate, and you really want to encrypt most of the crown jewels. And even our government agencies didn't do that with the OPM breach and stuff. And so, why make it so easy for the hackers to get everything they want? So I think you need to look at some of the basic elements and incorporate them in your strategy.
Yeah, you go back to the OPM testimony of Catherine Archuleta, and the Congress, one of the Congress people asked, "Why didn't you just encrypt this data?" And her actual response was, "Our data is too old to encrypt." What? Some of it is we've got this term cyber. What's a cyber? Why are we protecting a cyber? It was better when it was information security because at least we knew what we were protecting. So we've done some of this stuff to ourselves to make ourselves sound cool.
We also learned that different companies are in different maturity level in the cybersecurity journey, and it doesn't mean that if a company is a big company, they are in the high maturity level in their cybersecurity program. So it relates more to the vertical, to the segment they're in, the country, the region they're in, and so on. There are different factors there, but you need to really address the maturity level of a company before you provide your solution. And I see many cybersecurity providers, solution technology companies, they are basically just dropping the entire platform into a company thinking, here's the solution, go get it. And it's not effective because companies are at a different maturity level. The way we see that is first, a company needs to understand their network, what assets they have, especially on the industrial side, on the OT side. Many times it's the dark side. So they need to understand what assets they have, how these assets are connected, what are the proprietary protocols, and so on. And then after understanding the assets and having the vulnerability management and risk management done, then get into the continuous threat detection, then get into securing the remote access. There's a journey that you need to go through. And you, as a technology company, you cannot just come and drop your platform, assuming that this company is at the right maturity level.
That concept of a journey is, I think, really important. It's the general, path of adding new technology to a manufacturing operation. It shouldn't happen all at once. Technology is going to change, and you don't ever get to a point, no matter how much we would like it, where you say, we're done, we're resilient, it's continuous.
Yep.
There are a couple of directions that we should take. One is in the immediate steps, understanding and simplifying the concept of cybersecurity to address the immediate need. I completely don't argue with that. I do want us to think about, looking into the future, though, what are the things that we can learn from each other? We're talking about access management and, thinking about the concepts of just-in-time manufacturing and just-in-time logistics and shipping. That's something that we can in the cybersecurity world learn in terms of just-in-time permissioning. If I'm a person, for example, if I need access to perform a role that I perform once every 2 weeks and it requires a level of elevated privilege to do that, it's excellent that I have that when I need it. But the other 13 days and 23 hours of time, I don't need that permission. And should that permission be sitting there? So I think that there are some things that we can exchange and learn from each other. That just-in-time concept being applied to the cyber world really could have a very strong impact. Again, it does add complexity. So I understand where you're coming from a maturity standpoint, but I do hope that as a community, we can get to both the meeting the teams where they are to give them some of the fundamentals and also stretching ourselves to look to the future so that we can make some really important improvements, for 6 months and 12 months down the road.
And Summer, as Tom knows, I've been advocating a new way to define these policy constructs called the Kipling method. So Rudyard Kipling gave us the idea of who, what, when, where, why, and how in a poem. So it's my personal homage to him, but we should talk about who should have access to a resource via what application, when should that happen, right? We don't have time limited policies. And then where is that located, right? Getting visibility to it. And then why, the compliance aspects, there needs to be a lot more data classification, and we should be able to read the metadata so that we can understand at the packet level what is the value of the information being transmitted, and then finally, how should we allow that to happen? What are the high level controls that we should put on it? And so by thinking at who, what, when, where, why, and how manner, it really helps people understand something that is pretty darn complex if you look at it from the old constructs. And you're absolutely right. We give too many people too much access for too much time, and we need to stop that. And that, Manning and Snowden are great examples of that.
Your kipling concept is exactly how an adversary is thinking. And we have not shifted our thinking internally to be able to handle that in a resilient way. Because if I was an adversary, that is exactly who do I need to attack? When should I be doing it? Because now if I want to be low and slow, there are times that I can be hidden. When are the times that I should make those? So I think that's a really excellent way. Thanks for sharing that.
When you look at attack logs, you'll see, hey, our people went home for the day, right? So there's no traffic. And then suddenly you can see when the attacker comes in, you can see when they take their coffee breaks and their lunch breaks and when they go home for the day, and then our people come in. So there's a big chunk of time when we don't have any people using it, but it's the only people who have access to that resource are the attackers. And so why give them access? That's a simple way to stop the problem. Quit giving everybody complete access. That's the trust model that was built a long time ago. And that's what Zero Trust is about, eliminating that trust model. And that will solve a whole bunch of problems.
Guys, there are a couple more points I want to hit here before we wrap up. First, I want to talk about safety and security. Some in the OT community say that we need to approach security and OT just like we approached safety many years ago. So my question, Chuck, I'd love for you to take this first and again, pass the baton. What are the similarities between the security and the safety journeys?
I think there's a lot of similarities. I mean, when you're looking at, again, it goes back to risk management. You're looking at what can happen and how you could be impacted or hurt. So safety, you have a compliance and regulations. You have to follow a course of actions that are mandated usually by law, by governments. And perhaps now with security, we're moving towards that. You see it with GDPR, with sanctions and privacy. You're seeing it now with CMMC and the Department of Defense with requiring cyber hygiene. So I think, it really comes down again to that, having an understanding of the basics of risk management, what you have in your system, what is vulnerable, how do you mitigate threats, where your threat intelligence is shared, and also, which is often neglected, is some sort of incident response. If something does happen in a safety situation, there's protocols to react and what to do. And in cybersecurity, there needs to be the same thing, and particularly with OT systems, where they actually could be a crossover between security and safety issues. So, I think there's a lot of strong parallels.
Yeah, and the other thing that is a parallel is when you walk into a building, you don't look around and go, "I wonder if it's safe to go in here. Is the ceiling going to fall in on me right now?" And if it does, you're a victim of that, and no one blames you. But in cybersecurity, we still want to blame the victims. Oh, we taught you for years to click on links, and you've clicked on millions of links, but if you click on this one link, it's your problem. And I hear people say things like, you can't fix stupid. And I think those people aren't stupid. They're doing what they've been trained to do. And there are technological controls that can stop things so that we can build safety and security into the processes so they can use the systems to do their job without having to be a cybersecurity expert. And we can learn about that from structural engineering and other things in the physical world.
I thought John mentioned before the executive order from the Biden administration. I was happy to see that they really addressed cybersecurity very similar to safety, with best practices and industry standards around how to address it, how to create a board review of cybersecurity and safety committees, how to force the critical infrastructure on addressing it. I saw a lot of similarity between the way that the administration previously addressed safety to what they do around cybersecurity. And, obviously follow the colonial pipeline crisis. But I guess something positive came out of it, where companies are addressing that very similar to how they addressed safety before.
And the one caveat to that, though, is in technology, standards inhibit innovation. And so there aren't really any standards bodies in cybersecurity. We talk about cybersecurity standards, but this is evolving too quickly for us to have standards. So we have to enable innovation or we're going to get stuck. And I think of the movie Patton when Patton is standing overlooking at a tank battle and he says, "Rommel, I read your book." So as soon as we start controlling things and saying you have to do it exactly this way, they're going to read the book and then they're going to get around it. So we have to have a way to have some best practices and incentivize people to do the right thing while creating the ability to create massive innovation in this space all the time.
Folks, I want to get some final thoughts from each of you. I want to talk about the connected universe. All companies, all organizations operating today, they're connected. The security posture of the entire ecosystem impacts all of us. We've seen this. Many entities have had suppliers taken down by ransomware. Happens every day now. We've seen many who have received sophisticated targeted phishing emails from partners and suppliers that have had their own corporate accounts compromised. Bottom line is we're in this together and we need to work together to counter these threats. So my question for each of you, Blake, I would love for you and Yaniv to take this first, please, and then hear from our other security leaders. In the year ahead, what do organizations need to do to ensure that they're maintaining their required security posture while also achieving the best benefits of this connectivity?
Continuing, not just in the next month, in the next year, but beyond, continuing to assess the organization that you've created to address these issues and to make sure that you're getting the kind of sense of urgency that it demands and you have the right people in the right roles. You know, as IT and OT come together, not just for cybersecurity, but for the benefits that manufacturers see that are driving them in this direction, the effective organization that blends the respective but different knowledge bases in each side, the different but both required technologies is tough to do. This is where so many companies are struggling, is to provide that high-functioning organization with people having the right mindset of collaboration across disparate groups.
I agree. And so the way I look at that is it's a threefold approach where assessment, as Blake said, is one that you have to do, and you have to communicate very clearly your strategy to the organization, and then operational visibility. Because as I said before, when you speak to the CISOs and the CIOs of these industrial manufacturing companies, that's the number one challenge, visibility, understanding what they have in the industrial networks. And so getting visibility, because you can't protect what you don't see, and you start with that. And then I think the collaboration around putting the solutions for threat detection and for vulnerability management, but also making sure you address the ecosystem. Because just doing it for your own operation many times doesn't make sense, because you look at automotive, they can have the majority of their production line being delivered by the first-tier supply chain. And if their suppliers are being attacked, then the impact for their production line is basically the same impact as if they were attacked, right? So have a collaborative approach on how to address your cybersecurity strategy, not just internally, but make sure that you address the entire ecosystem.
I concur 100% with that. And I think it really does start with strategy. And if you look at companies, when they have marketing and sales, they look at and discuss it. They look at what the markets are, who the buyers are, what the challenges are. And the C-suite needs to do that with cybersecurity. And they need to explore different frameworks. They need to certainly look at zero trust, defense in depth, security by design, all those elements and how they may apply to their specific circumstances. And then they have to develop an interactive plan incorporating the CISO particularly, but everyone involved, whether it be compliance, sales, marketing, and the C-suite, to develop a complete framework that will take them from all the opportunities and risks out there that they need to continually evaluate and upgrade and tie it into the budget needs, because with most companies, it comes down to revenues first. And until they really change that paradigm a little bit to say, revenues, yes, but we're going to lose our revenues if we're breached. So let's make sure we keep our revenues. And when they do that, and follow a framework and have a security process, I think you'll see a much bigger recovery in our ability to defend ourselves in the cyber ecosystem.
And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, what I would say is when we have a strategy at the top, before we get to execution, there has to be an understanding of what the governance is. So there has to be someone who is responsible for this, those who are accountable for it, who's going to execute it. And so making sure that we don't have that missing piece and that there is discussion, all the way through the levels of executives and management and those who are going to execute. There has to be an understanding of who is accountable for this, who's responsible for it, who's going to actually do this. So don't forget about the fact that the governance structure has to be set and communicated as well.
And Tom, I just want to pick up on your comment about interconnectivity, because the physical world and the digital world are completely different, and we can't drag the physical world's analogs into the digital world the way we have been. The world is flat because TCP/IP made it flat. We are all directly connected to the world's most malicious actors. There are no suburbs on the internet. We all live in the same bad neighborhood. So we can't approach things the way we have been. And we need to understand how the attackers are going to work, why they're going to work. We need to understand the value of the data, how they make money. And we need to have a complete change from a how can we do this that makes us comfortable to how can we do this that inhibits the ability of the attacker to be successful, right? We can never stop them from attacking us, but we can stop those attacks from being successful and disrupting us, stealing data, and doing the things that are really, really negative in our world.
Oh, very well said. I want to thank each of our panelists here, folks. It's been a terrific discussion. I want to thank you so much for your time, for your insights today, for your interactivity, and for sharing terrific thought leadership today. So thank you very much for being a part of this, each of you. Of course, to our attendees, thank you so much. Again, we've given you a terrific cybersecurity leadership panel. This is where you come to see what CEOs and CISOs have to say about the security issues that are determining not just our present, but our future. Stay tuned for future events. Suggest topics you'd like to see discussed here. Nominate yourself if you'd like to be a part of this. We welcome the future discussion. I hope you can be a part of it as well. For Information Security Media Group, I'm Tom Field. Thank you so much. I appreciate, as always, your time and your attention. Thank you.